Okay. So let me share my screen. Okay, so today this is what we are going to be going through. We are wouldn't be going straight to the programming today, but we are going to be focusing more on setting up and then understanding actually what we are doing. So first on the line, let's look at why is it important to understand programming. Now, I believe most of you would agree with me that just a minute, let me. Okay. I believe most of you would agree with me that, yeah, maybe ChatGPT could do programming to an extent for you. Yes. But the truth is that ChatGPT cannot do everything for you. There are, in most cases, as a developer, ChatGPT would be failing you constantly. That's why it's best to understand programming. Now, aside ChatGPT, like there are so many ways to assist you in programming, and the purpose of ChatGPT, how ChatGPT would benefit you the most is not to program for you, but help you to be more efficient if you are facing challenges whilst programming. And as a programmer, it's not only ChatGPT. There are so many platforms you can, you know, refer to when you are facing challenges in your programming. First of all is Google. You can Google it and you are likely to get a solution. Stack Overflow too was one of the best before this whole AI things came. There's a website, Stack Overflow, which is very good if you are programming and you are facing challenges you can refer to. And then there's also GitHub, which people often share their codes. You can look at how they wrote their codes and then see what is wrong with yours and be able to modify yours. And ChatGPT too, yes. In certain cases, could ask, whilst programming, there might be some minor issues chat could easily assist you with too. But it's not advisable to focus on only ChatGPT, but it's very important you understand it. That's if you plan to become a developer one day. So that's why we are taking this tutorial sessions. So first of all, let's look at what is programming. Now, that's actually a book I'm writing, but I'm nowhere near complete. So programming is basically like a set of instructions. Okay, so basically programming is a set of instructions that you are instructing your PC to do something. That's basically programming. And unlike computers, unlike human beings, computers don't understand our language we speak, like English, French, the Bangladesh language, the Ghanaian language, the Japanese language. Computers don't understand these languages. And most often there's a misconception which I want to address clearly here, that computers understand only one language. Computers understand only one language. Today we are here to learn Python, but the truth is that the computer you are working with doesn't understand Python. There's only one language computers understand, and that's called the machine language. So it's very important for you to know that any programming language you learn, whether JavaScript, whether Python, whether TypeScript, whether Java, whether C++, C, the computer doesn't understand it. The computer understands just one language, which is the machine language. So how are computers able to understand these Python languages we are writing for them? Okay, now, secondly, just like humans also communicate in languages, yes, and then the computer language is just one language, machine language. Humans also communicate in different forms. That's like talking, writing, and all others. But computers, there's only one way we communicate with computers, by writing it for them. So unlike humans that can comprehend different kinds of communication, we communicate with computers by simply okay. Okay, so computers understand only written form. Okay, so this language should be in a written form for the computer to understand. So now let's focus on the first one, that computers understand only one language. So when you are learning whenever you are learning a programming language, in fact, the machine language is very difficult to learn because it comprises of ones and zeros, like a series of ones and zeros. So what actually came up is that people have been able to build a way around it to develop their own languages, which can be converted into a machine language. So Python, you're actually coming to learn today. It's one of those languages people have developed, and this language can be converted into a machine language for the machine to understand. So this conversion process, there are two main ways to convert it. That's either you use an interpreter or a compiler. Python actually uses an interpreter. Now, let's get the difference between these two. That's interpreter and then a compiler. So Python actually uses an interpreter. So what an interpreter does is that now let us look at this image quickly. Okay, so let's say there are two gentlemen that want to communicate. Both are of different languages. Okay, so there should be someone in the middle, someone who understands both language to be able to convert, like listen to one and then tell the other person, okay, this is what this person is saying. Now, this man in the middle, there are two kinds of man in the middle. That's the interpreter and the compiler. So what the compiler does is, let's start from compiling. Compiling everything you want the computer to do. That's all the codes you have written. It converts everything into a machine language at once. However, interpreter doesn't convert everything. As and when a code is needed, that is when it's converted into the machine language. So these are two concepts as a programmer you have to be aware of. That's the interpreter and the compiler, because they are very key in terms of the kind of application you are planning to develop. Not every application suits an interpreter, and there are some applications that you definitely need to use a compiler. So as a programmer, it's very, very, very important you understand these two concepts. Python is strictly an interpreter. Python is strictly an interpreter. So Python doesn't convert all your codes into the machine language at once, which the computer understands. It loads everything and then converts it as and when it's needed. Any questions so far?
Are you sharing an image? Because I can't see your screen. No.
Oh, you can't see my screen?
No, I don't know if I'm the only one.
Can everyone see my screen?
I can see this. I can see the screen.
Yeah, because you
Then,
said there's an image you were putting on the screen or something.
yeah, I
Yeah, but
shared
we
an
can't
image.
see any. We can't see anything.
Oh, can you see the like image?
No.
Wow. Can the others, can you see?
Yes, I can see.
Yes, I can.
Hey.
Okay, then I think change your view and see. At times, joining from mobile phone, the view may not be clear.
Okay.
So
Okay.
try adjusting your view.
Okay.
So the like image is basically two gentlemen with someone in the middle. That's the whole concept of an interpreter. Of course, the machine doesn't understand the Python codes you are writing. That's a language developed by someone, though. So there should be a man in the middle, just like how people, just like how there are translators in companies that translate from one language to the other. So in programming, we have basically two types of translators. That's the interpreter and the compiler. The interpreter the compiler converts everything into machine language when your program starts, but the interpreter doesn't. He converts it as and when it's needed. Okay, so up to this point, is everyone clear? Any question? Okay, since there are no questions, let's continue. So right now, the first thing we are going to do is to install this interpreter. So if you haven't done any programming in Python before, it means if you currently write any Python code on your computer will not be able to understand, because there's no one installed on your PC to interpret it for your computer. So we have to install this interpreter, or like this man in the middle. Now, so we are going to go through how to install Python on our computer. Kindly note, what you are installing is not just the interpreter, but a full package that comes with additional tools that helps the programming much more easier for you. But basically, the main reason why you have to install Python on your computer is that your computer doesn't understand Python. So there should be someone in the middle to convert what you have written into a machine language that your computer would understand. I believe some of you have already installed, and some of you too are new to this. So we are quickly going to go through the installation process. That's why I advised everyone to join with a PC. So first of all, you can Google Python. Okay. You can Google Python, then go to python.org. Make sure you are going to www.python.org. Now, depending on your PC, after you go to python.org, go to downloads, then download python.org. You could also specify your PC, because some of you might be using Mac OS instead of Windows. So to be sure, you can just go to the Mac OS version and download. but that's to be also sure. If you want to download the Windows one, you could go to the Windows side and download. So those without it, please go and download it currently, just like how I illustrated it. Then after downloading, it should appear in your downloads. Okay, then you double click on it. So we are installing what can convert our source codes, our Python language we have written, into a machine language. So when you double click on it, you go to use admin privileges and add python.exe to path. This second option is very important, because if you don't check it here, going back to do it is more technical. So it's best to check it here, because if you don't check add python.exe to path, you may have to do it manually, which is a bit technical. So after checking this, I am also prefer using admin privileges. Then you click on install now. But I wouldn't install because I am already have it installed on my computer. Okay, so at this point, after doing this installation, it means your computer is ready to convert anything you write in Python into a machine language. Up to any point, up to this point, any question? Those who don't have Python installed yet, any challenges? Okay, so since there are no challenges, now when I was talking, I was mainly making mention of written. So basically, computers understand only written languages. You cannot talk with a computer, unlike humans, we could talk, if even there are so many forms of communication, including gestures and others. But anything you are doing, it has to be written. Now, Python comes with an IDLE. That's for those whom have learned Python before, but I am going to explain it later, especially for those whom haven't learned Python before. So now, this like it's basically a written language. You have to write it. Now there are so many forms in writing. The most traditional way of programming, not just Python, it's using Notepad. Any plain text editor, including Notepad. Any plain text editor. Okay. Any plain text editor, okay, can actually do programming. Any plain text editor. However, it's not advisable. Example, you can write your Python code here. Maybe something like this. For those whom are new to programming, don't worry about what I have written. Then just save it as a py file. Let's say my first code .py. Okay, then save it. This becomes actually a py file which you can execute. However, it's not advisable to be writing in plain text editors such as Notepad, because they are very difficult. In fact, with programming is strict, so even a comma could make you run into errors. So it's best to use something called an IDE. Now, some of you too have probably heard of IDLE when it comes to Python, but I still advise to use an IDE. Okay, never use an IDLE. That's if you are using it to program. If you are using it to learn, IDLE is fine. You can use it to learn. But in actual programming, you have to use an IDE. So what is this IDE? So IDE is actually a software that has been designed specifically for programming. Okay, because programming, aside the plain text editor you also need other things. Example, after writing your script, there's a need to run your script, which we are going to be looking at it later. Now, IDLE takes away all distress, and then it comes with a whole lot of tools. In fact, what I am actually using for this tutorial, what I am typing in is actually an IDLE, which we are also going to install. So for those who have no IDE installed, I would advise you to choose two, either Visual Studio Code. This is not Visual Studio. They are two different things. Visual Studio Code is different from Visual Studio. Now, for those whom don't have any IDE installed, choose either between Visual Studio Code or PyCharm. Those are the two I have used and the most recommended. And PyCharm. These are the two that are the most recommended. Either Visual Studio Code or PyCharm. Now, I am more familiar with Visual Studio Code. So if you want to use Visual Studio Code, you can go by Visual Studio Code. Now, you can easily get Visual Studio Code by just Googling Visual Studio Code. Now, Visual Studio Code was actually made by Microsoft. So you can even see it here, code editor by Microsoft. So you can go to their website, that's code.visualstudio.com. And then you can download for Windows. Okay. Other platforms too are there in case if you want to download for Mac or Linux, but I doubt anyone uses Linux here. But if you are using Mac too, you can go and download it. PyCharm too is, I think, open source, though most of JetBrains, their IDEs are paid, but PyCharm is an open source by JetBrains. So if you prefer PyCharm, you can go to JetBrains website. JetBrains is, I think, a Czech Republic company that does extremely fantastic IDEs. So you can just go there. I think their PyCharm is free, so you can just download it. But I normally prefer Visual Studio Code. So most of the tutorial sessions we are going to be doing will be in Visual Studio Code. Up to this point, any question? Okay. So okay. So now let's move into the IDE. After you download and then install, okay, you will have an interface like this. Let me zoom out. you are going to have an interface like this. Okay. Then there are two main places I would want you to have a look at. We have the menu bar here with several options on. Now you can open a file. Okay. Now, example, let me open a new window. Okay. After you install it, it should come as something like this. Okay. Now, the first thing I would want you to do is to install certain extensions. Okay. Now, extensions helps you to get certain features to suit the kind of programming you are doing. So you are going to see some 4 boxes. I have a couple of things installed, extensions installed. That's why you are seeing a lot. But I think if you install it fresh, there are basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just 5 here. So go to your extensions, okay? Then search for Python. Now you are going to see Python, Pylance, and Python Debugger all by Microsoft. Because I have installed it, there's no install button here. But if you just downloaded your Visual Studio Code, you are going to see install button just like this one beside these ones. Click on install for all these 3. Make sure all these 3 are installed. This will help make your programming life easier, because the truth is that in programming you need assistance. So by installing these extensions, you get certain assistance from the IDE when you are programming. When you make mistakes, it is able to identify it. Now, in addition to this, there's something called IntelliSense. I think IntelliCode or something. Yeah. IntelliSense is for Visual Studio. So IntelliCode. Okay. I would advise you to also install this, although it's not compulsory. But if you want to really take programming as a career, you need a code assistant. Not to write the codes for you, but to identify errors as and when you are writing your codes. So IntelliCode 2 is very important, though it's not compulsory. You can decide to install it or not. So if you want to install IntelliCode 2, you can install it here. Now, the second thing I would want to hit on is the Explorer. That's these 2 file signs here. It's an explorer. It's just like your file explorer on your Windows, like this one. Okay, so we have a file explorer in the IDE that can help you navigate easily through files and folders. So what you actually do is that where you want to build your application in, you actually create a folder to build your application. Then open that folder through the file explorer. So we can, I'm assuming we are building an application. Then we want to place that application in Python tutorial. So we can just open the folder in the file explorer inside the IDE. So you don't need to be going back and forth. You can see all your files in the IDE. So immediately I open the folder, I see all the files inside that folder in my IDE. Also, even if I want to create a folder, I don't need to go back to my file explorer and then go and create my folder. No, I can create a folder here. That's new folder. Then probably just name my folder new tutorial folder. folder. I have created my folder. To verify if it exists, we can go and check Python tutorial, and then you are going to see this new folder created here. Now, let's create a file. Let's say just testing dot maybe testing.txt. Now you are going to see that the testing text file has been created here. So with the help of the IDE, that's why it's very important to use an IDE. Okay, because you don't even need to be going back and forth in your file explorer, like now do something then open your file explorer. No, you have an easy navigation. You can be navigating through your operating system's file explorer. Now, thirdly, another thing I would want to draw your attention to is the terminal. We are yet to write our first Python code, but after writing any set of codes, you need to run it, and normally it is done through a terminal. The terminal can be on Windows, it can be PowerShell, command line, different terminals. Example, you have your command prompt here. Okay, you have your PowerShell. You can use all these kind of terminals to run applications on your computer. Now, the same way, if you write your codes and you need to run your codes, most often it is the terminals we use, either PowerShell, command prompt we use. However, just like what I always say, going back and forth is not the best. So with the help of the IDE, you can get all your command lines over here, whether it's PowerShell, command prompt, Git bash. Later, you are going to learn about them, Ubuntu, and then others. But these are the two most common you are going to be using now, PowerShell or command prompt. Either works perfectly well. Up to this point, any question on the walkthrough in an IDE which we chose Visual Studio Code?
I'm lost. I got lost at some point because my network on my computer is really poor. So I'm trying to download all of the Visual Studio Code and the Python. So I got lost in between why we need the IDE and why all of these things are important. All the other features we told us to download.
Okay, okay, so let me go through that side again. So why we need an IDE? There are three main things I highlighted on, although it goes beyond that. The first one is the extensions. Okay, now after installing the IDE, please make sure you install the Python extension, because programming is very difficult without an assistance. And assistance in programming did not just begin when ChatGPT came to place. It began from years back. Because programming without an assistance is very difficult. Because every symbol, every comma, like there are some things when you leave out just a little thing, you are going to run into errors. So it's very important to get assistance. So these IDEs provide a level of assistance. Now, with Visual Studio Code, you have to install the extension of Python so that it can be assisting you in your Python. Okay, so first install Python, Pylance, and Python Debugger. These are going to be assisting you when there are mistakes in your programming. you are going to know. It also does some nice highlighting for you. When you install these extensions, it highlights certain things for you. When we start coding, you are going to see why it's really important to install this extension, because it also does a form of highlighting for you, for you to be able to easily visualize your code. So it's very important to install the Python extension. I think PyCharm already comes. PyCharm is specifically programmed for Python. So you wouldn't really need to install any extension to get those kind of features, because it was programmed for Python. But Visual Studio Code is programmed for a lot of applications. It doesn't excel in only Python. It excels in a whole lot of applications. So it's best to install the Python extension so that it can be assisting you, like making the visualizations clear, giving you some clues and others, which you are going to really appreciate if you start programming. Then also, so for the Python extension, it's compulsory to install, because you would need that assistance at minimum level. You are going to need that assistance to develop applications, because application development, at times the codes are like up to like 15,000, 20,000 lines of code, and not visualizing it clearly, and then also not getting certain assistance would be very difficult for you. Now, in addition to that, there is an optional one you can install called IntelliCode. IntelliCode. That one too is by Microsoft, just like the Python one, which was by Microsoft. Installing it would be very helpful, though it's optional. There's a difference between the IntelliCode and the first one. IntelliCode tries to give you a hint to certain things, and then at times even the hint you can just press the tab, that if you feel the hint is right, you can just press the tab to auto complete what you are trying to write. So it's very useful, though it's not compulsory. But the Python extension is very important. You have to install that one. It's compulsory. Now the second one is the File Explorer. Now, instead of going back and forth with your File Explorer here, you can just open your folder here, the folder you are writing all your applications in. You can just open it here, then easily navigate. You can even create a new folder. Let's say another new folder. Okay. After creating this, you are going to see it has appeared here. Wait. It should appear here. Yeah, another new folder. Okay, so that is another advantage of using an IDE. Okay, you don't need to be going back and forth between folders. You can even create a new file here. Let's say new file .txt. Okay, now I am using .txt for now. Okay, now you are going to see that I think I created it here. It is here, new file, and then the type is a text document. Okay, in addition to that, normally after writing your source code, okay, you would need to run it. Okay, normally what we actually do, although we are not here there yet, we either open command prompt or PowerShell to execute whatever we have done to see how it works. Okay, now instead of you to switch between windows, like opening it, closing it, going back to your text editor, you can also just get it here by just going to terminal, new terminal. Then you can open any terminal you want. Let's say new terminal. You can choose PowerShell, command prompt. There are other ones, but these are the two we are going to be focusing on: PowerShell and then command prompt. So you open PowerShell here. You can also open command prompt in your IDE. Okay, up to this point, any question? Okay, so please, it's very important. Please install the Python if you don't already have it. If you already have it and you don't have an IDE, Python comes with IDLE. You can use that for learning, but I would advise you to use IDE because that is the standardized one for writing code. So we are going to be doing almost everything in an IDE, and I would advise to actually use Visual Studio Code. Although PyCharm works perfectly, but most of the examples we are going to be doing here would be in VS Code because that is my favorite text IDE. So at least you can flow along with it perfectly than using PyCharm. But PyCharm too is perfectly good if you are already used to PyCharm. Up to this point, any question? Now, let's go to virtual environment. Then from there, we could begin our coding. Now, virtual environment is very important. And let me use this picture to explain. Can everyone see the picture? Okay, I am presuming everyone can see the picture. Now, just like we have TVs in our houses, like there could be more than one room, 2, 3, 4 rooms. Each has its own TV, right? Now, I want to use the concept of universal remote and then the normal remote to explain this concept. Okay, now we can decide to have a remote for each and every TV. That remote would only work for that TV. Example, let's say you have a Samsung TV. You can have a remote that can only operate that Samsung TV. It can't operate any other TV. So let's say we have Samsung, Hisense, and then maybe which one? LG. Okay. Each has the Samsung has its own remote, the LG has its own remote, the Hisense has its own remote, and the remote cannot be used to operate each other. That is how the virtual environment works. Okay, but we can also have a general one. That's one remote that can operate all the PCs. So you can decide, okay, let me just get a universal remote and get rid of my individual ones. That's every TV has as that remote can operate all the TVs. Okay, or you can say that, okay, I don't need a universal remote. I am going to use an individual remote for each and every TV. That's all the virtual environment. So the virtual environment is basically creating its own environment. So it doesn't depend on the universal one again. So let's say TV1 has its own remote one. Okay, let's say each TV, let's say TV1 has let me zoom in. Let's say TV1 has remote one. TV2 has remote 2. And let's say TV3 has remote 3. You see the IDE is giving me suggestions. That's why it's very good to use an IDE. It makes life easier. Now we could decide to operate by this model, okay, or we are just going to get just one remote to for TV1, TV2, TV3, just one remote to that's our universal remote to operate all these TVs. Okay, that's the whole concept of virtual environment. So just like the virtual environment with a TV scenario, let me zoom in. With a TV scenario, this one, it's not a TV but an app. So let's say app 1 would have its own virtual environment 1. Okay, app 2 would have its own virtual environment 2. Then app 3 would have its own virtual environment 3. You see it is doing suggestions for me. So that's the good thing about installing certain things that helps you to auto complete things. Now, or we can go by the other way. That's app 1, app 2, and then app 3 would all have a global environment. That's a global environment, G. Okay, so what this means is that all the applications would be using one environment. That's assuming you installed, let's say, Python, the Python interpreter you just installed, the Python that comes with it is installed in the global environment. Okay, so assuming you are using a global environment, okay, you just installed Python, let's say 3.13, Python 3.13. For those who are confused with what I'm talking about, what you just downloaded was Python 3.13. So assuming you just installed it on your computer, so it means your environment, that is your global environment, that's your computer as a whole, has Python 3.13. But if you are using virtual environment, you can install another Python here. Let's say Python, let's say 3.7 here. Let's say Python 3.9 here. Let's say Python, let's say 3.10 here. That's the good thing about virtual environment. This is very important because though you may not understand it at this stage, but for those whom have also got a bit deep into programming, there are something called dependencies, and not all fit into each other. So I am using Python as an example because that is the only dependency you have installed so far if you haven't done programming before. Python 3.13 is the, is it 3.13? Yeah, 0.1. 3.13.1 is the first dependency you have installed. That's why I am using that to explain the whole concept. That with the help of virtual environment, you wouldn't need to depend on what it has been installed on your machine as a whole. You can have separate installations. So assuming I have installed Python 3.7 in my virtual environment 1, it means my virtual environment 1 is using Python 3.17, not the Python 3.13 we installed globally by downloading Python and then installing the Python plus its interpreter and everything, plus the dependency Python 3.13. Up to this point, any question? Okay. So since there's no question, we are going to see how to create this virtual environment to isolate, to get a different environment aside the global one, the system as a whole. Okay. So first of all, you can open any command line. For now, we are going to go with PowerShell. So for those whom are new, just go to terminal, new terminal. It will open a PowerShell for you. Okay. Then now, you can check if Python is installed by just typing Python negative version. That shows the Python version you have installed. In my case, I have Python 3.12.4, though the current one is Python 3.13.1. Now, it's not always necessary to update your Python. In fact, the truth is, that's why virtual environment comes into play. Because at times you might be wanting to install a certain application you might be wanting to build a certain application which Python 3.7 or 3.9 or something suits best for your application. So it's not always compulsory to have the latest Python. So I am going to be still using my Python 3.12. If you have another version, you can decide to update it or not. But it's not compulsory to update your Python. Now, just a minute. So we are going to first create our first virtual environment. Now, after typing Python negative version, it means your Python works very well. So we can go to the next stage. Okay. Now, these things, there's no need to memorize them. Like I always say, there's no need to memorize codes and then command line instructions and others. There's no need to memorize them, but just understand them. Okay. The most important thing to understand is that, oh, to check the version of my Python, I need to type something inside either my PowerShell or my command prompt. And what I have to type is this. If you have forgotten it, you can always refer it to it by just Googling it or asking chat or something. Like, there's no need to try to memorize everything at a go. As you use them, some will stick. Okay. Now, to create a virtual environment, okay, there's something you have to type in your command line. That's just like how we typed Python negative version to know the version of Python that is installed globally on our computer. When I say globally, I believe now everyone understands global and virtual. So now first type Python, okay, -m, then venv, then the name of your virtual environment. Let's say v1. Okay, enter. Now, after typing it, you are going to see that a new folder is created here called v1. Like I said, that is the fun thing about using IDE. Immediately the folder is created, you can see it inside your file explorer. Rather than going to your destiny and then checking, oh, okay, the virtual environment here is okay. Now, this is a long process. There's no need to be going back and forth in your folders. Okay, so just see everything is here, including, so you can see clearly here that after executing this command, we have a new folder called v1. Inside that folders, we have 3 folders, include lib and scripts, that you can see it here. Inside this, we have 3 folders and then 1 file. It can be clearly seen in the, let me close this one. It can be clearly seen here, plus the configuration file, which is this one, the configuration file. Then inside this too, we have a couple of things. Okay. Now, up to this point, any question? Okay. So if no question, let's move on to the next stage. Now, the next stage is to activate our virtual environment so that everything we are doing is separated from the computer in general. Okay, that we are creating our own environment called a virtual environment. That environment doesn't actually exist. It is something we are creating rather than using the global one we already have. Okay, so that one too. Now, one trick you could use to understand is, if you check under scripts, there's an activate file here. So that is the file we are actually trying to get access to. Okay, so what we are going to do is, we are already in the Python tutorial. We are already there. So it means we have to move to what? VNV, scripts, and then activate. So the scripts folder is capital S. /activate. Now immediately we type this. Okay, you can see that there's a green something here that's called v1. It means now whatever we are doing it in a virtual environment. Any installation we are doing is in a virtual environment. Up to this point, any question? Up to this point, any question? Okay. Are you guys tired or we can move on? Are you guys tired or like we should move on? Okay. We should move on. Okay, so let's move on to the next step, which is variables, and then let's move to the next, which is so I think the tutorials went fast than I expected. So we have completed. So let's move on to our next that's variables and data types. But I hope up to this point everyone understands, because we are building on this. Later we are going to go through how to use different dependencies in a virtual environment, which is different from the global one. That's especially like maybe downgrading or like upgrading your Python. We are going to look at it later, but the most important concept is getting to know the virtual environment. Okay. Now, let's go to variables and data types. Now, what are variables? So we are here, variables and data type. What are variables? Just a general definition of variable. Yes. Can anyone define what a variable is? Just the normal English definition. Hello? Yes. Oh, anyone? Okay. Now, let's go straight to the definition of variables. Okay. Now, variables, just like what you learned in maths, it's like something that is not fixed, something not fixed. So a variable can always something that its value. Okay, so the keyword its value is not fixed. So actually programming has some sort of ties to maths. Okay, so just like how we learned in our basic mathematics, a variable is something that its value is not fixed, so the value can change. Example, just like how we learned in maths, we can have a variable x, which can have any value. It can have the like value of 5 today, it can have the value of what, 10 tomorrow. The value of a variable is not fixed. That is the same thing. That same concept is applicable in programming. In programming, we have something called variables, and these are variables because it is not fixed. The value can change. There's one thing I would want you to note. Python does not have constants. Just like how you learned in maths, we have constants and variables. Some programming languages have constants that the value doesn't change. But in Python, we don't have constants. We have only variables. So the value can be changing. That's the same concept applied in Python. A variable's value can always change, and in Python, we don't have constants. Now, what is the purpose of these variables? What is the purpose of these variables? So, unlike maths, you are using it to store just numbers. Okay. In programming, variables, not in Python, but in programming, variables store data. That's the basic principle in programming. These variables just store data. Now, by our mere explanation of maths of variables, like how x equals 5, x equals 10, okay, That 5 and 10 is just one kind of data in programming a variable can store. So this x equals 5, x equals 10. This is just one type of data a variable can store. But there are so many types of data a variable can store, which we are going to be looking at the data types. So we are also going to look at data types after variables, because these variables basically store data. And because they are variables, they are not constant. Any data stored inside the variable can always be changed. See, it's like a bottle. Okay, that same bottle can be used to store a drink. It can be used to store water. It can be used to store different items. Let's say to like today our bottle, we can say we are storing water inside. Tomorrow that same bottle, we can say we are storing drink inside. Okay, so there are so many different data types, and basically variables store data. These data can always change. Assuming Python had constants, the only difference would have been after storing the variable that is fixed, you can't change it. It is like something sealed in a container. You can't open that container. So that is the main difference. But fortunately, Python doesn't have constants. Python has only variables. So any data stored in the container or the variable in this case can always change. Today we can put water inside our bottle. Tomorrow we can say we don't want water, we want another thing. Okay, so these kinds of data can always change. So now let us look at the kinds of data we have in Python. The first kind of data we have is numbers, which we just did. Normally numbers doesn't come first, but since we explained it from the maths point of view, I am bringing numbers first. The order doesn't really matter. Now, that is the first kind of data we have in Python. Numbers can come in different forms. So in maths, what are some of the kinds of numbers we have? Anyone with an idea? Anyone with an idea of the kinds of variables we have? Okay. So in maths, we have different types of variables. We can have the numbers, the integers. We can have decimals, and then complex. What are integers? Integers are positive and negative whole numbers. So basically integers can be, let's say, -1, -2, let's say 1, 2, 3, etc. Okay, those are what? Integers. Positive or negative whole numbers. Now, what are decimals? Okay, so this is where the conflict comes in. In programming, we don't call it, normally we don't refer it to as decimals, but as floats. Floats. So floats are the same as what? Decimals. Okay, so example of decimals are what? Those with points behind. Example, -1.1 is a decimal, negative 2.5 is a decimal, 3 is a 3.5 is a decimal, and so on and so forth. So decimals floats are basically like decimals. Okay. Then we have the last type, which is complex, and an imaginary part and a whole part, which we are not going to go much into because you might not even use it at all. So far, I haven't really come across a case I have to use a complex number. But a complex number has an imaginary part and blah, blah, blah. Those are for the mathematicians. Up to this point, any question? Okay. So now, since there's no question, let's first execute our first Python code, okay? Now, we are going to be doing it from IDE, okay? So let's create a new file by going to new file here. Then I am just going to name my file tutorial. But instead of just naming it like that, I am going to put .py. Every file on a computer has an extension. So the extension for Python is .py, just like how the extension for a normal text file is .txt. The extension for Python is .py. So you save it as .py. You have to take really note of it. Extension for Python is .py. So anytime you are saving a Python file, you have to save it as .py. Now let's go to our Python file. Okay. Then now let's run our first Python code. Okay. Now, how do we create a variable? It's just like how you do in maths, just writing, let's say x is equal to this, x is equal to that. So in Python, we just create a variable that's x is equal to 5. So in this case, we can say that the name of our variable is x and the value it contains is y. Please note, so in this case, the name of variable is x and the value it contains is 5. Okay. Now we can create another variable. Now, unlike maths, we don't really need to use letters x, y, z. We could even say, let's say variable 1 is equal to 5. Now, so in this case, the name of our variable is what? Variable 1, and it is holding the value what? 5. We can also create, like, it can have different names, but note, it can start with a number. And it can have spaces in between. You see it as underlined. It's a variable name cannot start with a number and it can have a space in between. So it should always start with a letter. It can start with a number. So example, this, our IDE has highlighted that it is an error. Now this boils down to what I was explaining earlier, the importance of IDE. It gives you visualizations. Okay, installing the extension would help you give you nice visualizations. So in VS Code, Python, the variable name is highlighted in blue. whilst a number data type has a light green sort of highlight. So you can clearly see it rather than writing it in a plain text editor. Let's say Notepad. Let's say X is equal to, let's say 1. This has no highlighting. But if you are using an IDE, it clearly highlights for you to see that, okay, this is my variable name, variable 1. And this is the data it is storing, that's 5. And the data is a number, so it's highlighted something like greenish, whilst the variable is highlighted blue, because that is our variable, that's the name of our variable. Now, this is highlighted red because it is an error. So normally the errors, you see a red underlining. But if you are using a plain text editor and then there's an error, you can't see anything. So that's one of the advantages of using an IDE. Okay. Now we can have, let's say, variable 2, which is equal to 10. Okay, so we can create different types of variables with let's say we can even name our variable number 1 is equal to, let's say, 20. Our name of the variable is num1, and then the value is what? 20. Now, to explain something, let's go to inbuilt functions. Now, we are going to be learning one inbuilt function called print. Now, everything we are doing in our Python file, we could execute it and see the outcome. Okay, now executing it now in the IDE Visual Studio Code, instead of going to your command prompt, and then executing the file here by Python blah blah blah, you can just click on this play button and then execute your file. Let me change it to Python file. Okay, now since you guys are fresh, you are not likely to be asked to select an interpreter like what I was asked to. But assuming you are asked to select an interpreter, just use what I did and then select it as I did. Now, let's run it as a Python file. Now, you are going to see that after running it as our Python file, we didn't really see anything. This number 1 is equal to 20 has actually run, but we never saw anything. Okay, so now to see the things going on, we have to use something called print. Now, this is the fun thing about using IDE and then IntelliCode and others, and then the Python extension. It has done a suggestion for me. The Python extension is telling me, oh, there's an inbuilt function called print, even before completing the print I am typing. Okay, so I can just select it. Okay, then the print function, okay, basically takes what you want to display inside your terminal here. So the print is an inbuilt function. We are going to be going deep into inbuilt functions later, but for now, just note that print is an inbuilt function. that helps you to display things inside your terminal. So if we want to display the value of this number into our terminal, we use the print function and then put the number within the parentheses of the print function, just like what I've done here. Let me zoom it in a bit. So now if we run our code, you are going to realize that it printed what? 20 here. Okay. Now let's do more example. Let's say variable number, or let's say y is equal to 200. So let's print y. Print y. So we put y inside the parentheses of the print function. Now, if we execute our code, you are going to realize it printed 20 and 200. First, it printed this, that's 20, and then it came here, printed y, which is what? 200. Now, let's take this off just to explain the print function. Now, we have executed it, and then it printed 200. But the whole code ran, the num1 and the y all executed. But we decided to display only y inside the terminal. That's why we are seeing only 200 inside our terminal. So the print function is just used to display things inside our terminal. So up to this point, does everyone understand numbers and then the print function? Okay. Now let us go to another data type. The next data type we have is text. Now, text in programming, instead of saying text, we say string. String, not text. Not text. Okay, so normally when we say string in programming, we are referring to text, which is the next data type we are going to look at. So text is basically what we see every day out there as text on our phone. It can be a name, it can be an email, it can be a whole passage. It can be name, email, name, email. In fact, it can even be a whole passage. A whole passage. That's text. So this is the next data type we can store in a variable. Now let's go to our PY file again, then see how to store text inside variables. So now let's use the basic X and Y, because that's what people understand. Okay, let's say X is equal to, let's say, Fachimo. Okay, or let's name our variable name. Let's say name is equal to Fatimo. Now, writing a text in programming, you have to put it in quotation mark. The quotation mark, let's say we have two texts, okay, can either be single or double. There's a double quotation mark, there's a single quotation mark. As you can see here, it can either be a double quotation mark or a single quotation mark. Now, either ways represents a text. So any text you are typing should go into the quotation mark. So even if it's one passage you are typing, all those texts should go into the quotation mark. Now, there's a third way of writing text. Let's say a passage. Okay, a passage can take more than one line to make it visually clear. So in that case, you can use 3 quotation marks. Okay, or let's say passage 2. Okay, normally when you have a lot of text, you can put it in 3 quotations mark, and that 3 quotation mark can still be either double or single. This is single 3 quotation marks. This is double 3 quotation marks. This is something we called multi-line. Multi-line. Okay. So this is a multi-line string or a multi-line text. That's a text which cuts across a lot of lines. It's best to make it a multi-line string. So all the text would basically go here. All the passage text would be going inside the quotation marks, not outside it, inside it. Okay. Now, but for something simple like name and then email, you can just use either a single quotation mark or a double quotation marks twice. But if you feel the text is too long or it is going to cut across lines, use 3. That 3 can either be single or double. Now, let's use this as an example. Let's say name is Emmanuel. Email is, let's say, emmanuel@gmail.com. So in this case, the name of our variable is name, and the value it is containing is a text, Emmanuel. In this case as well, the name of our variable is email, and the value it is containing is a text, emmanuel@gmail.com. In the test scenario, the name of our variable is passage, and the text it is containing is this passage I just brought up, just a random thing, multi-line text. The same way, this is our variable, and this is the kind of data it is containing, which is basically a text. Now, when we run this, we are not going to see anything. When we run this, we are not going to see anything because we are not displaying it inside a terminal with a print function. So assuming we want to see name inside our terminal, we just put the name of the variable name here, name. And if we want to see email, we just put email inside our variable, our print function, the name of our variable, which is email, inside our print function. Now, if we run it, we are going to see that it now displays Emmanuel and then Emmanuel@gmail, because it will display the value the variable contains. The same way we can as well print passage 1, print passage 2. Now, you see the beauty of using an IDE. I don't type things in full. It can do auto suggest for me, and then I just click on tab to just make it complete. Then I run it, and then now it's displaying everything inside my terminal. So for now, we have learned 2 types of data. We have learned the numbers, and we have also learned strings. We will be going deep into each and every one, but this is just a brief introduction I want you guys to go through. Any question up to this point? Okay. Okay. I think we have done a lot. So what I would want you guys to do is to go through what we have done. That's basically, if you don't have the Python installed, go and install Python. If you don't have Visual Studio Code, install Visual Studio Code, install all the extensions I taught you, then go through, like try to create a virtual environment like what I did, which we are going to be going much deeper into virtual environments later. Then also brush through the variable and then how to write a variable, number, string. We have gone through at least 2 data types, which is number and string. Try to go through. I will make this video available. Practice on your own. It's very simple. Just like make variables, assign values to them, print it inside your terminal. For now, just focus on numbers and string. Then later we are going to dive deeper into other data types such as list, boolean, and all others. Okay, so I think at this point, I will just end the recording and then also end the whole tutorial.